Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks, the podcast that celebrates the people and places that make this beach special. In this episode, I talk with Delia D'Ambra, who grew up in Manio, graduated from Manio High School, went to University of North Carolina, and after getting a degree in journalism, landed a few reporting jobs before creating her own podcast called CounterClock, which Rolling Stone magazine recently named as one of the top 25 true crime podcasts. The CounterClock podcast immediately gained local support because her first unsolved mystery investigation was the murder of Denise Johnson in Kill Devil Hills back in 1997. Delia is great at investigative reporting and the research that goes along with it. Since CounterClock has come out, she's added more to her plate, and we'll talk about that in the interview. So sit back and listen in. Rolling Stone magazine says you're one of the top 25 best true crime podcasts of all time. That's got to feel pretty good for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to me that the show has become what it's become, that the stories have been heard, how they've been heard, because some of them are more obscure than others. But yeah, to get that nod from Rolling Stone was really cool because it wasn't expected. But I think it just goes to show how many millions of people are listening and really absorbing the truth of these stories, maybe that was never heard before, or the context that was never heard before. And to me, that's really powerful. And it's powerful because it's not going out under the label of, a huge network or a journalistic label, right? Like New York Times or something like that. Like you don't have this juggernaut distribution, though AudioChuck now is quite a leader in the industry. You don't have that, this is an NBC Universal or something like that releasing it, which would get it to the masses in a certain way. So yeah, that was really cool.
And I guess, and I'm digressing a little bit, but when you're a small company, you have the ability to steer things quickly and change directions quickly instead of having a corporate CEO dictating everything that you want to do.
Yeah, I think obviously the initial startup structure that AudioChuck had when I first met Ashley Flowers back in early 2019, late 2018, it was really just a startup model. I mean, it was a startup for a few years, and now it's really gotten to the place where it's not only an industry frontrunner, but it is an industry leader as far as standard of quality, standard of structure for limited series like the shows that I do. And so, yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing about that company and the way they distribute things. It's pretty cool.
Right. And so I was doing a little research and there's CounterClock. That's your original podcast, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then Park Predators came after that?
Yeah. So I started CounterClock by myself in early 2018 is when I started doing reporting and producing on it. And then it gained quite a bit of a following when I was distributing it on my own, just with the RSS feed out there. That was kind of an era where podcasts were around, but a lot of people weren't exactly listening to them regularly. And so when that kind of caught steam, and then Ashley kind of cold emailed me out of nowhere, she had just had Crime Junkie, which is the flagship show for AudioChuck. And she was like, hey, I love your work. You're a journalist. I'm not. I love your skills. Let's kind of blend worlds. And so that really started off with CounterClock season 1 being finished, re-released with additional reporting I had done. And then I did season 2. But in between that time, I saw her vision to build a network for podcasts, and I saw that she wanted me to be a part of that. And so in building that and her obviously trying to hire more staff, I think it started out with 3 or 4 of us, and now I think it's almost 40 people, maybe a little more than 40. But in that time between season 1 and season 2, I came to her and I said, hey, I have some ideas for other podcast shows that I don't see out there that I think would really fit into the true crime genre. Park Predators is a research-based show, so I knew I was going to be doing everything for that, essentially, but I also needed to focus on the extensive work that goes into investigating a season of CounterClock. And so to do those two things simultaneously, Park Predators being more of a research-based show versus an active investigative show, allowed me to do those things. And so I pitched her the idea. I had the concept. I had everything, like, here's what I want for the artwork and that kind of thing. And she was like, love it. Let's do it. So, and then I came to her with additional shows and ones that have now been put out on the network. So it kind of grew like that. But Park Predators was a concept that I had in my brain. I didn't see that out there in the landscape of podcasts. And it really is a unique type of show. And it really pulls people into maybe the true crime genre that would not ordinarily listen to true crime content. We have really been able to put in front of outdoor people, outdoor enthusiasts, recreation folks, that kind of thing, that would ordinarily not listen, but they listen to that show regularly. And that's really cool to be able to reach a kind of a different demographic. And I kind of knew that at the outset. I thought, we're going to get more than just true crime people that listen to this show.
Yeah, good one. Find your audience.
Right.
There's also something called Dark Arenas, and I couldn't find much else about Dark Arenas. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Dark Arenas was a limited series interview-based show that initially released back in, I believe, 2019 or probably 2020 to Stitcher Premium. It was a paywall release, and I believe it was 9 episodes. But I did additional interviews, bumped up the total episodes to 15 episodes, and that is going to release to wide audience, meaning on all distribution platforms. So it won't be behind that Stitcher Premium paywall. Those new episodes will release everywhere this fall. So I was able to really make it full and get additional folks that had listened behind the paywall. I was able to get additional interviews from really good sources because they had listened. And so it was like, hey, let's make this bigger and better. And then when we get it back from Stitcher, we'll release it to everybody. So yeah, it's interview based in that each episode is different. And I'm doing a one-on-one interview or interviewees with multiple interviewees about folks that work in what would be considered a dark arena, right? So maybe FBI agents who work in sex predator task forces, U.S. Marshals who do fugitive hunting. I talked to former director of the CIA. So there's this kind of specific ecosystem that these individuals work in, and it's quite dark, and it talks about what they do, but how what they do makes the world a better place. Right. So yeah, it's really cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah, James Altucher just had a great episode with a New York City crime. I don't know if she was to be considered a coroner or she'd go to she would show up on site, and
yeah,
New York City, a lot of deaths, a lot of crazy stories.
Like a coroner investigator. Usually they have
exactly.
people that go out. Yeah.
And man, that was crazy. And she kind of touches upon this psychological stress that these people are under constantly, So
yeah, and some of the new episodes that have never been released before that will be released in the upcoming season, they are some of these folks. It was just amazing. I think one of them was a former head driver for George Bush. He was the Secret Service dedicated. He drove all of the limousines and cars that the president was in at all times in every country that he ever went to. And it's just wow, the stress of that job and just you're dodging just his stories about, I don't want to give too much away, but his stories about just we had to divert at the last second, things that the general public has no idea are going on. And I think that's kind of what fascinates people about those types of interviews.
Very cool. So, I'm doing my research on you and just trying to absorb as much information as possible. And the one word I come up with is prolific. You are just jamming it out. I mean, multiple shows, you probably have, I guesstimate, at least 100 recordings, and in a very short period of time, right? So you started researching Denise Johnson in 2018. Next thing you know, boy, what was it? A year or two later, you're putting out. So let's say 2020. You started.
Yeah.
Here we are 3 years later, and you're just jamming it out.
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of thing you spoke to earlier. It's it is a fast-paced industry. Again, when I joined Audio Chuck at that sort of ground level of startup, I mean, any startup will tell you you're your quality has to stay there, but you just have a lot of people wearing different hats, doing a lot of different tasks, like all of the same mind typically. And that really was the case. And I think just really finding and jiving with people, but also too, like I had been in journalism and what I would say, investigative and storytelling since the outset of my career in when I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in 2014. And I dove right in and became like a field general assignment reporter and investigative reporter in Virginia for an NBC affiliate, and did 2 full years there, immediately transferred to South Florida, did 4.5 years. So like I was in courts, I was in people's backyards, I was in like all of that was so like you go into the deep end. And so long as you can handle it, like you do learn so much, and is so fast paced that I was really used to that, right? Like I was used to, okay, this person has said they're going to talk to me. I'm going to go now. Like I'm going to go now before, something else comes up or they change their mind kind of thing. So yeah, it's funny because people are like, how do you guys do it? And I'm like, but I was always doing it and just in a different way. Like
it was kind of a perfect storm where your education, your experiences all just kind of led to this point where we're at right now.
Yeah. And I do tell people like, my career, what I've done, what I've been able to build and create, like, though it has slowed in terms of like the pace, it has slowed, right? But like I do put so much time and energy into a season of, I mean, it's a year or more of my life. Sometimes with Denise Johnson, it's been 5 years. Like I am still working that case. And so though it's fast paced, it doesn't change the amount of my time and energy that I put into him. But yeah, to create new show concepts and then have those go out and then have teams of people work on them. Like, yeah, there is a certain point where those productions get away from me as an executive producer or me as the producer or host or whatever. And so that helps balance things out, I think.
Right. So what came first? Was it the podcast or was it the investigation of an old crime? I mean, did you just start doing the investigation and say, you know what, this would make a great podcast?
No, it was really simultaneous. So leading into like the end of 2017, I had listened to 1 or 2 kind of similar type podcasts, like in the sense that they were limited series, but they were really done by what would be considered maybe like amateur. They weren't done by credentialed journalists. They were folks that were just kind of like exploring and learning. And I was like, oh, I like this about this. I like this about this. But like, I really think like instead of, someone saying they had to take, 4 weeks to find how to get a document, I'm like, well, I know how to do that. Like I can just do that a lot quicker. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll bring my skills and I will make a podcast investigating an unsolved crime and really tell it through the lens of my experience and like what I'm like the journey of doing it, but also like actually trying to find out information, right? Like actually trying to progress the case. And so when I wasn't just gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna Google John Benet Ramsey, or something that was just like completely overdone. I said, well, let me, I'm here in South Florida. Let me do something where I like feel really confident. I have connections, like, because I knew how important it is to leverage the relationships and connections and, source potential that you have to build sources. And so that's why I chose the Outer Banks. I did not set out with Denise Johnson. What I did was, is there a case I don't know about in my hometown? Probably not, because I've lived, I would know about it, right? But I did not know about Denise Johnson. I had no clue. And when I first researched, I think I Googled like unsolved homicide, Outer Banks or something. And she was the only one that popped up, like the only thing. And it came right up to the KDH website where she has a special page dedicated to her. And I was like, whoa. And I was reading about it. I was like, oh my gosh. And then it was really that first call with Donnie Johnson, her sister, that for me, I was like, whoa, this has got to be the case. Like there's a lot of elements here. There's a lot of things I think, but let me talk to Donnie. Let me make sure her family is on board. And so that I knew from that outset, I was like, okay, I'm going to produce this as if I'm producing an audio only product, like get away from like TV and what makes a TV news broadcast story and just make this long form. And that was kind of where it started. So it's really simultaneous, I think, for me.
That's cool. You brought up something is you've mentioned that you're a storyteller. And I like how you mentioned you're basically walking the listener through this investigation, which I think is
Yeah.
that's a very different approach to the whole process. And I have listened to several of the episodes, and that's definitely what's going on. It's very cool. You do a good job of balancing the investigation. I don't know, you deal with the witnesses very tactfully. There's no gotcha moments. You're kind
No.
of probing the questions, and I don't know. I think people seem to open up. You add disclaimers. I see that quite a bit. I remember listening to one. I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. And you came right in and gave a disclaimer. Sorry, my dog barking.
You're fine.
Gave a disclaimer about, this is what the witness said, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so it's obviously there's an ethics part of it that's very important to you. Why is that?
Because I think it provides context, right? And with full context, I think inherently has integrity, right? Like if you provide everything contextually you need about an isolated one-on-one conversation that no one else was a part of, everything that preceded it, everything that came after it, everything that was happening unspoken during it, then there's integrity in that. And you're not trapping this person. You're not parsing everything they say. And, unfortunately, I would say in traditional mainstream, media and journalism coverage, like you do, unfortunately, whether intentionally or just because of, the way that the product is distributed, like you can lose that. Right. And so, and I've been a part of that. I've seen that. And so my outset with this was, how do I make sure that I always try and keep that? Right. And I think the length of the program, the ability to go longer, the ability to include more voices, like helps that. So that's really big for me. But and I think like the format alone is really important, because something that's unique about audio storytelling like this, especially when you put it in an investigative frame, is you're not only the voice for you as the host, and you become this personality that the listener like identifies with, right? They're like, oh yeah, Delia, go get it. Like they're cheering for you, they're sad with you, they're mad with you, all of that. But you can also be sort of a removed voice as well, where you're providing that sort of, hey, that's weird, right? Or, well, wait a minute, this didn't match up with this person. And so there's a sort of you're kind of like a dual voice for the listener experience. And then you also have the voices of the actual interviewees saying whatever they remember, heard, or saw. And so I don't have to narrate that for them. They can walk me through discovering what they discovered, or walk me through this secret that they've kept for decades. And I don't have to try and like type that up in a way that's powerful. You just hear it for yourself. So there's all those kinds of things that blend that I think make it what it is, and why people are kind of like hanging on every episode.
Yeah. And you did some on the ground investigating for the Denise Johnson case. You're doing so many, it seems like you're producing so much stuff. Are you able to do that to this day, or is it everything just research and phone calls?
No. So like even the additional reporting that I've been doing this year, on a really, really, what I would consider to be a very interesting lead. It has taken me back to the Outer Banks. It's taken me back to my interviewees, obviously my former interviews, like touching base with them. So that's, phone call, email, messages, etc. But, I've even been pulling records. I've contacted agencies in multiple states. So there's a lot of like moving parts to it. But yeah, I mean, I have been back to Norfolk Street. I have been back to the area, but a lot of it is like, to me, like the answers to that case, maybe some would say are still there, but I think many are not. Like, I think there are people, right, that have answers and stuff. But as far as like going back and doing like going back in the house and the neighborhood and things like that, like that time, that ship has sailed in some sense, right? Like it's more than that. But yeah, I mean, I've been back and I've had many a conversation. I see Donnie Johnson. I go by her house almost every time I come through that part of North Carolina. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. She hadn't met my son yet. Because remember when I met her and talked to her, it was 2018. I was, single. I've gotten married since then. I've had a kid. And so it's really cool to keep up that, though she is what would many people would be, see as a source, right? She's not to me. She's the actual friend. And she's somebody that I get to see as much as I can, hopefully. So.
Right. So it seems like podcasting is your full-time job. How is that transition from, regular journalist to a podcaster?
Obviously when I left TV, there was that element of it slowed down a little bit, like just, okay, let me focus my energy in these more specific places. I thought the transition was awesome. I mean, it's allowed me to do what I love in the format that I love. I travel all over for interview. I mean, because when you're talking about cold cases, like people don't live where they lived 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Often they don't. I mean, some people do. And so traveling more was certainly it's something that I anticipated, but I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So now we're here. Right. But yeah, it's been very fulfilling, and it's been really cool to do this work and to transition out of that a little bit more, like I call it, like hyper type career. Like it was just more hyper. I loved it. Had a wonderful experience in working for TV affiliates and even doing print stuff as well. But yeah, this is what I think I do best, and I think what I do that has a little bit more meaning and legacy to it than what I was doing before. So
when you left UNC Chapel Hill, was this even a remote thought?
No, I never thought when I graduated university that I would be doing this. Though I will tell you, I remember early on in my career, probably like within the first year, right, feeling the desire to work on particularly a crime story for longer. Right. And I just felt the draw to do that.
Instead of the,
I thought, man, I don't want to get away from this because like there's so much I didn't look into, like because of time or because of, direction from higher ups kind of thing. And so that was certainly, but not when I graduated Chapel Hill. I mean, I was initially doing both sports journalism and news journalism. And there were a lot of folks at that time when I was graduating that were like, I'm going to work for ESPN. And again, this is all before layoffs and all before sports got cut from pretty much everywhere cut. So there was a lot of people. And I remember having the thought of like, no, that's fun. And I love, because I worked for the Carolina Hurricanes, I worked for the NHL, and I did all sorts of stuff in sports arenas. But I was like, I like news, but I like investigating news stories. So like, I'm going to make sure I'm really good at both, because I don't know if this one side of the industry is going to last. Like I had that thought early on, because I had the thought, like, not everyone is going to be an Erin Andrews. Like not everyone is going, like not all of us are headed that direction, male or female. And so I knew, I was like, I really want to dig my heels in on this as well. And I'm glad that I did, because I ultimately fell in love with that type of journalism. And I don't think without that I would have been able to be here. So that was something that, like, though I didn't know I'd be doing this, I certainly had like this concept in my mind of there's going to be change in this industry, and there's going to be change not only in where talent ends up, right, which is what I was at that time, but it's going to change formats too. Like I had a real thought of like, I don't know how long this like live shot TV thing. And you see that, you've seen that in just the last couple of years, like podcast is now so dominant, and, I couldn't have predicted it then, but I certainly had a feeling about it for sure.
Good for you to have that kind of foresight.
Yeah. I think I graduated. Gosh, I graduated a year early, or almost a year early too. So like, it was a long time ago.
So your dad was, correct me, police chief of Manio?
Yeah, my dad was chief in Manio from, I think he took the job in either 92 or 90. No, he took the job in 97, excuse me. And he retired in 2007, 2008 timeframe.
And did that affect your, crime, passion, so to speak, or?
Not really. And I do joke about this with him, because he wasn't, my dad wasn't that homicide detective grizzled by, thousands of cases. But I did remember talking to him when I first started the Denise Johnson investigation. He's like, yeah, no, I remember that was obviously in KDH, so it wasn't his jurisdiction. but he had worked murders, but really it was it's funny because when my dad first started his career in the 80s, he actually didn't become a law enforcement officer right away because he was too young, and he went undercover. He was an undercover narcotics agent, like embedded in a cartel for a few years. And so there's that like sense that he was doing investigations, right? Like, but he was doing them so covertly and like picking up, like, so I think maybe I got a little bit of that from him, right? Like sort of like, I'm going to embed myself into this place I've never been before, and this thing I've never been before, and like learn everything and talk to people. And like, so I don't know, but no, I wouldn't say that my dad's like community oriented policing, like police chief platform. What do you call it, motivated me to do this. But I think having that in his background made me have an appreciation for what law enforcement does, but also knowing that like there were things in his career that he was like, man, why does this person do it that way? Or why is no one doing it? Like the questions he had for the system he worked in, I certainly got that. Like he allowed me to see the lens of law enforcement in both for what it's good for and for what it's negative, what it's not good for. And that's certainly something I've witnessed throughout the work that I've done, is like, these things are all great and good, but this part of it is not. And clearly things suffer for that. And that's a problem.
Right. And I know there's a couple episodes where the Denise can't talk. The Denise Johnson people are saying, the cops didn't do a very good job. And that probably kills you a little bit, like, oh God, they're getting a bad rap. I'm gonna
it is hard. And again, that comes back to the context, right? Like it's one thing to just let someone say like the cops screwed it up, they're terrible, blame them. However, when you place it in context of the 1990s in a department that has no reason to know how to handle this level of a homicide.
They have one every 10 years or something.
Yeah, like I don't think that you can just say, oh, it's all their fault. Like that's why I did what I did, is to investigate and look at all the things that either weren't or couldn't be or would not have been assumed then. And so some law enforcement agencies are receptive to that, and they're like, yeah, like we weren't there then, like whatever we can do, whatever you can do to help, like. And then some are more cagey, and they're cagey likely because those same individuals have stayed in that organization. And so they don't like that. And nobody likes to be told like, hey, I think you guys did a terrible job. And you're still around. Like nobody loves that. It's not a great look and it's not a good feeling. But I do think there are some people who kind of put that aside and say, okay, like what can we do? So yeah, I definitely think that, when people are critical, I have to navigate around that as the host and as the reporter of saying, well, here's why that might be, or it could be what you're really thinking and they're just terrible at their job, but like giving those the explanations.
Right. Does your dad ever give you any feedback?
Oh yeah, my dad, he has listened. I think it took them a little while to start listening, but he is like always just like, man, how do you get these people to talk to you? Like I've worked with detectives who can't get people to, and I'm like, I think it's because I'm not law enforcement, right? I think it's because I'm just a person trying to learn the truth, and people pick up on that. Right. But yeah, his feedback's always like, man, that person, like who would say that? Like, and I'm like, I know, so it's encouraging. I know he's super proud.
That's awesome. Well, it must make Thanksgiving dinner pretty interesting too, huh?
Yeah, it's really
Sit
funny.
Around and talk about crime stories.
Yeah, and my parents too, because my dad, he does these long walks in the morning, and my mom, he'll do stuff around the house or whatever. And so sometimes they don't like to listen if one's further along than the other. So they like to be up to speed on the season. They're like, oh, wait, I haven't gotten that far yet. Don't talk about it. And so it's always interesting. Like I was just home recently, and my dad was like listening beyond what my mom had listened to. And she was like, no, like, I'm so upset. Like, don't tell me, what's in season 5 or the end. So that's where the conversations have transitioned about their like competing listening habits versus
Right.
what I'm actually doing.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. Can you give me a brief synopsis of what it's like growing up on the Outer Banks, or how your experience was growing up on the Outer Banks?
Yeah, I mean, my experience growing up in the Outer Banks was pretty great. My dad obviously was the chief of police in Manio, so he's busy. He worked a lot. My mom in and out of working at healthcare places, and then ultimately took a job at the Outer Banks Hospital when it opened. She's been there since it opened, so she's like OG Outer Banks Hospital. Um, and my mom homeschooled me. My
Really?
sisters went to Manuel Elementary some, and then she pulled them out and homeschooled, and so I was homeschooled kindergarten through the end of ninth grade.
Okay.
And so we had a great group of folks that were also like a group that was homeschooled in between the beach and Manio. And we went to Manio Baptist Church on the island, and that was a really robust church then, and so we had a lot of great community. And I think that was just a really good positive experience, specifically growing up on the island, right? Because it is a bit isolated, and then being homeschooled is also even more isolating.
Right.
But I got plugged into, I don't know if they still do them, but I was in so many parks and recreation sports for Dare County. So
Yeah.
that really, in addition to being an outgoing child and an outgoing person, being involved in those things, like, obviously exposed me to social skills, and kids that were, different, or had different backgrounds and families and stuff. And so that really helped me when I went to Manual High School in the 10th grade, and then stayed there 10th, 11th, and 12th before I graduated. Like, all those same friend groups I had made, kind of, they knew who I was, right? Like we just
Yeah,
kind
you
of
weren't a
blended
total
in.
stranger.
Yeah, and it just worked really well. And then also academically too was really great. Is my mom, in homeschooling us, she did such a wonderful job that I was pretty advanced and pretty far ahead academically. So when I went to high school, like, it really wasn't difficult for me. University was not difficult for me. I went to Carolina pre-med with a good amount of scholarships. And
Wow.
so even though I transitioned to journalism, like, that was a really cool thing, to be able to, go in state, not be super far away, still get a great education. But the Outer Banks, I think just going to the beach, like, having all of the cool experiences of being outdoors and exploring, and meeting up with friends, and not being in this huge metropolis, I think that would have probably had more of a negative effect on me.
Right.
And so I think, you make those friends, and you build relationships with people. And we weren't born and bred, Outer Banks. Like, we moved there in 97 when my sisters were a little bit older, and I was like 4 or 5. So there was a sense too of, like, you have to go and meet people and make friends. Like, you aren't just, you've been together because you're all, have family members. Or so that us, like, now I see that in my career. Like, if I'm the stranger in the room or in the group, like, I have to become part of that community in a certain sense. And so that was kind of something that I think kind of mirrored in my later life, which is really cool. But I love the OBX. I am trying to get up there as much as I can. It's hard though, because it is far away from where I live now. And when I was working the cases in season 1 and 2, I was there a lot, which was great. But yeah, it's different now though, because now when I go, a lot of people will come up to me and say, oh, and they'll want to talk, and so, and it's cool. But there are also times too where I'm like, okay,
Yeah, it
thank
gets a little
you.
fatiguing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's awesome. But I'm eating lunch, we'll talk about it later.
Well, my daughter, I have a daughter and 2 boys. My daughter's 25, and she told me about your podcast. She loves your podcast. She's a little jealous that I'm interviewing you right now.
Oh my gosh, tell her I say hi.
You bet. I said, well, Olivia, give me some questions. And she couldn't come up with anything. The only thing she could come up with is, if there's any more dirt on the Denise Johnson thing, ask her about that. Is there any recent stuff?
There is. I literally, like I said, I've been working a lead or two since the start of this year. And I'm hoping to put out additional content on it. I'm aiming to put out an additional, like, big update episode, maybe 2, from basically everything I've looked into and reported since the show came out, but specifically this lead, that's like pretty substantial, and law enforcement is aware of. So yeah, it's just a matter of working it. But until they solve it, I think it has to be worked, right? Like somebody's got to be doing it.
I feel like you're very close. Well, just listening to the episodes, I feel like you guys are on top of it. So I hope that comes to a closure that everybody's going to be happy with.
Mm-hmm.
At least I guess having closure would make a lot of people happy, I think.
Yeah.
So are there any other podcast shows coming up? Any projects you might want to put out there for us?
No, really, like, I mean, I'm working season 6 of CounterClock, which will come out in spring of 2024. So I'm like 7 months into that investigation. Even though season 5 just came out in May, I work a year to year and a half ahead. So it's kind of staggered. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm writing content for Park Predators season 5, which comes out next summer, and season 4 is releasing now through the end of August. So it's very working ahead of time. But I mean, AudioChuck, a lot of the shows that AudioChuck puts out, they have like a full rotation and schedule of a great content. They have a good mix of limited series, which is really what my shows fall in the category of. They're not weekly shows. But they have a whole mix of stuff. And I've EP'd shows. Strangeland is a really great investigative series that has 2 seasons. And that's very similar to CounterClock. And
what did you say you did? You VP'd it?
I executive produced EP.
Okay, sorry. EP.
So yeah. So like overseeing the reporting and the investigating team, and then the final product, reflective of that. So being on board with the project, and that show's really good as well. I highly recommend, if people enjoy CounterClock, they will definitely enjoy Strangeland season 1 and 2, because it's very much the same format, and it's these stories you're like, what, like that can't be, and I think people really like. I'm glad that people appreciate that.
And you never seem to have a dearth of cases to look at, so you're always new stuff to report on, which I guess keeps the machine moving.
And that is one. It's both a positive and a negative, right? Like, I love that people are like, hey, we see what you have, right? Like, we see the platform that's there. Can you help us? Can you look into this? And I get a lot of messages, like dozens a week, from friends or family of murder victims who are saying, please, can you do a season of CounterClock on this? Or please. And I will say season 6 is a result of that exact thing. But obviously, like, I can't do a whole season of CounterClock on every case that comes my way. Like, there's just no capacity for that. And I don't even want to call it criteria. It's just a terrible way. But the threshold to be met to do what I do on a case for CounterClock, there does have to be certain elements to it, right? Like the ability to access something, time, though it's not as much of a factor, like participation of family. Like, I can't just have someone who's writing in saying, hey, I have no attachment to this case, but like, you should really look at this. Like, it's okay, well, you're not connected to that, you know what I mean? And do they really want that to be done? And so there's a lot of that. But yeah, it's so hard for me, because I'm like, I want to help everybody. Like, I want to help everybody. But at the same time, like, there's a reality of it.
So how long is your vetting process? You must be just overwhelmed with all these things, and it's just yes, no.
It's pretty, I mean, when I vet something, I would say it's extensive in the sense that, like, I can pretty much recognize within like the first week or two, like, hey, I don't think what I do is going to help you, is going to help, like it's more of a grievance, right? Like, sometimes you get that sense that could be the case, or what have you. But like, it is, I mean, I look at it, I have meetings with people, like I really do. And then there are some cases that it's immediate. It's immediate. Like, this is going to be a season of CounterClock. Like, this is going to be, right. Because it's just, I've gotten to the point now where I'm really attuned to it. And I'm really, I just see it ahead. Like, I start going, and my husband knows it too. He'll see me come out of a meeting, and he's like, I've lost you for the next year and a half. Like, you're not, okay, we're gonna, where are we going next? Like, that kind of thing.
That's funny.
So yeah.
So kind of wrapping things up real quick. You have a website. What is it? Is it Delia D'Ambra?
Yeah. So my website is DeliaD'AmbraW.com. That's my like professional website for me. And then the shows are counterclockpodcast.com and parkpredators.com or Park Predators Podcast. I can't remember. That's terrible. But you can find it. And then Audio Check too, audiocheck.com. They have all the shows there, and even ones that I don't host that I've helped create. So
very cool. Very cool. Well, I appreciate your time, Delia.
Yeah.
This was great sitting down and talk with you. The name of the show is Treasures of the Outer Banks. And even though you don't live here anymore, you're definitely a treasure. We're proud of you. We're happy for you. And we hope we wish you the best going forward from here.
Thank you so much. I was so glad to be here.
A big thank you to Delia for sitting down for this interview. I greatly appreciate it. And again, it's very exciting to see her have this kind of success. As an aside, it shows you how hustle can convert to success. She's obviously worked hard to get where she is today, and I admire that. Best wishes to her in her career, and don't forget to check out her podcast. Also, be sure to check out my website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com, and sign for email so we can stay in touch. I promise I won't be annoying. Until next time, make it a good one.